the best computer in the world ever turns 40. All this and more coming up on This Week in Retro.
High-resolution color graphics.
This land of high technology.
The revolution in technology that made the information age possible.
Those kids are not afraid of computers.
Happy 40th, my old friend.
You ride that dolphin.
For GOGs sake.
All this and more coming up on this week's show for the week of Saturday, the 14th of June, 2025.
Up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dave. We're going to do this every week. We're going to get into the habit of introducing yourselves. My name is Dave. I'm one of the hosts here. I'm joined by my two friends. One of them is called Jason. Hello, Jason.
I am the one called Jason. Thank you.
And the other one is called
Hello.
Chris.
And that would
Please
be me.
identify yourself.
That would be me. Can't you see my name badge?
We're not doing this for people who are watching, Chris.
I know. Oh, dear. Yeah.
Have you had a good week? Chris, we'll start with you. We'll talk to you about how your week was, because you've got something that you'd noticed that I hadn't.
Yeah, and it was almost in this last week. Anyway, I was very tempted to take a day off recently, that day being Thursday, the 5th of June, which keen movie buffs may know that that's sort of been pegged as the day that Ferris Bueller took a day off 40 years ago. Although, if you look into it, some would actually say that it was probably in April due to how the school system in the States works. I'm not really clued in on that, but if you search it on the internet, people say the 5th of June and then other people say, but it would have been April. But anyway, 40 years ago, roughly, Ferris Bueller took a day off. I didn't take the day off, though, because it was raining here in Perth, actually. So it wasn't worth skipping school and stealing a Ferrari. So I went to work. Yeah. What about yourself, Jason? Taking a day off recently?
No, I didn't have a Cubs game to go see with Ferris and the crew, but also news for those that are just on the video side. I had a camera self-destruct on me, so we were experimenting with a new one, and Chris was a little concerned that I looked topless last week, but I'm pleased to note that nobody has complained, so I think I got away with the beige turtleneck and can keep that in the rotation.
I have noticed that my sound wasn't sounding great, so I have moved the microphone closer. I don't know why I got into the habit of moving the microphone further and further away. At some point in the past, I identified that the microphone needed to be very close to my mouth to sound good. And for some reason, I let it creep away, so that's not happening. And I think 2 out of the past 3 episodes, listeners and viewers won't know this, but my computer has blue screened during the episode recording, and everything has been preserved, but I don't know why, so hopefully today, no blue screens. If there are, you won't find out about it. Shall we get straight into it, shall we? We've got a lot to cover today.
We have. Let's go.
Back in the 1980s, a certain young man, me, was enthralled by Dungeons and Dragons, by Tolkien, by fighting fantasy, and by the rise of a new phenomenon, computer role-playing games. Now, I say new, and I'm not quite correct because they had existed for some time. They really started to pick up pace at the end of the 70s. And then by the mid-80s, they were on fire. They were such a popular thing. And they were getting better. They were starting to go graphical. They were getting more accessible. They were more fun. They were just great. Now, I had my Amstrad CPC at the time. And I had just about given up on the idea of tabletop role-playing games. So that's playing them in person, pen and paper, if you like. But I had really got into the Bard's Tale, one of the few computer role-playing games available on the Amstrad CPC microcomputer. And it came out in 1988, so it came out quite a few years later than it came out in North America on the Apple II, and of course other machines as well. The Bard's Tale is one of the biggest role-playing game franchises from the 80s. It's one of the ones that really popularized the genre. So I got it a few years later on my CPC, and the CPC was a bit of a desert for RPGs. There wasn't very much on there. You sometimes got text adventures with kind of rudimentary RPG elements and people trying to make a game that didn't quite work as well. But the Bard's Tale was fantastic. But something happened, and it happened not long after I got the Bard's Tale. I was at a friend's house, and we used to play tabletop RPGs together. But he got something that stopped it in its tracks, and I never went back. He had got a hold of Dungeon Master. Dungeon Master is reported to be the top-selling Atari ST game of all time. I don't know how to validate that. I'll take it at his word. It's also reported to be the game that actually caused people to go out and buy Atari STs, and I can understand why. It certainly did it for me. I cannot put into words how good Dungeon Master was for me. It was exactly what I wanted, and I got an Atari ST that Christmas in 1988. Now, for me, the Atari ST was about games. I had read in Dragon magazine, which was the official magazine for D&D from TSR, the owners of D&D at the time. Now, they covered other RPGs in the magazine too. This is an era where things weren't exclusive. They weren't as locked down into walled garden as they are now. So even Games Workshop's magazine, White Dwarf, covered D&D stuff as well, which seems wild now because it's each magazine from these people is just to sell their own stuff. But Dragon magazine had a section called The Role of Computers, and they would periodically put this into the magazine, and they would review role-playing games that I couldn't play because the vast majority didn't come out on the CPC. But when I got my ST, I got access to some of them. But the Atari ST was more than that, more than just what it was to me. And now that's 40 years old, Trevor Keverson submits an article from Time Extension where Damien McFerrin talks about his own experiences with an Atari ST. So I could talk more about my own experiences with the ST, but I don't want to go too heavily into that. I want to talk to you about what the Atari ST is, as I understand it, not what the modern internet might say about it, but I want to talk to you about what I understand the Atari ST to be. You'll see people describe the Atari ST as a budget computer, and they're both right and wrong. It was not cheap on launch. There were much cheaper options if you wanted a budget computer, but on launch it was 1,000 American dollars for a 512 kilobyte model with an external disk drive and a color monitor, or $200 less, so $800 if you wanted the same package but with a monochrome monitor instead. And many people did go for the monochrome monitor, and it wasn't a fluke they went for it because of the specifications. Now, the Apple Macintosh, released in 1984, and in terms of hardware, it was just like the Atari ST, except it didn't have the custom chips that the Atari ST had. So the CPU effectively ran at 6 megahertz rather than 8 megahertz because it had to do some work for the screen. In fact, if you go down the specifications of the Mac versus the ST, then you'll see that the ST beats or matches the Apple Mac in every way. It's a bigger monitor. It's a higher resolution. It's got more memory. It's got a faster CPU. It's got better sound. And more importantly, the ST launched, as I mentioned, monochrome, $800 versus the Mac at $2,500. Although the Mac did launch over a year earlier, and by the time the ST launched, the Mac price will, of course, have dropped. The Mac 512K, which is sometimes called the Fat Mac, which is closer in spec to the ST, launched a bit before the ST with a price of $3,195, which just so happens to be 4 times the price of the ST. So yes, it was budget, but also it wasn't budget like what a Commodore 64 or a Coco would be at the time, or even a Spectrum across here. The Atari ST was a powerful computer, but you got a lot for your money. So if you wanted to do desktop publishing, if you wanted to do word processing in a graphical environment with a mouse, the ST hands down beat the Mac on paper, or on the screen too, I suppose, but it only beat it in terms of specifications. The infrastructure around the Mac was simply better. Better printers, better software, better support, better interface. The Mac was a lot better than the ST for everything apart from the specifications. So if you're doing anything serious where the extra cost, the extra $2,000, whatever it happened to be, to buy the machine in the first instance, was not a significant thing when you talked about the volume of business it would do for you, then you were a Costco Mac. And that's why the industry called the ST the Jackintosh, a portmanteau of Jack Trammell and Macintosh on launch. In 1984, Karl Steinberg, a German businessman and a musician, founded the company Steinberg Media Technologies. And in 1984, he created MIDI Multitrack, which would go on to become Pro 16 for the Commodore 64, a MIDI sequencing program. And a year later, he ported it to the ST and called it Pro 24. That would go on to become Cubase, the de facto standard for musicians into the 1990s on the Atari ST. In almost every environment, you had people doing MIDI sequencing. It was the Atari ST. The Atari ST was not as cheap as the C64 was for this. And sending out MIDI signals is not actually that demanding, so it's not as if you needed a 16-bit computer to do MIDI. But what you did need the ST for was a very clear, high-resolution screen, a mouse, a GUI, built-in MIDI ports with impeccable timing, rather than to have to go through an interface, and a built-in disk drive, all in the package that you got. So you bought the ST and you had all of those to go. So it was ideal for musicians and composers and studios to use because it was a point-and-click computer, perfect for the job. And that's why all the kind of dancey music you listened to in the 90s was made on an ST. So in terms of a monochrome computer, what you have is an ideal small business computer, an ideal music room computer, an ideal desktop publishing computer for companies where price matters. But that's not why I love it, and it's not why Damien in his article loves it either. By Christmas 1988, it was priced to compete with the 8-bit computers in the UK, not as cheap, but it was affordable for your kids' Christmas. And I must have nagged my parents enough to get one, because I did get one.
Dave, is there anything you'd like to tell us about that neighborhood cartel at this point? The old Christmas cartel?
We all got them. We all got Atari STs.
All affordable for the families.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Did you take them around each other's houses on your BMX?
Yes. On a BMX is to play Atari STs.
Fantastic.
For me, though, I'm sure for many of you listening, it was the games. I've already mentioned Dungeon Master. Damien mentions that too. He actually mentions Starglider, which is an interesting one because Starglider from Rainbird, as the intro tells you, worked in high resolution too, worked in mono. And in mono, you got this, for what you wouldn't expect from a 1985 computer, this really high resolution thing. It's incredible. He mentions the weird, quirky Captain Blood with its Jean-Michel Jarre music. But I'm going to rattle out a few more games that I love playing, that I still love playing now, so that you know what to play on an Atari ST. Stunt Car Racer, Speedball, Speedball 2, Another World, Xenon, Xenon 2, Vroom, No Second Prize, Captive, Nightmare, Falcon, F-19, F-29, Castle Master, Driller, Turrican 2, Supercars 1 and 2, Oids, Chaos Strikes Back, Super Sprint, Carrier Command, Kickoff 2, Lamatron, Populous, and of course, where I first started playing, Ultima. Yes, I've got an Ultima reference in. For a period of time in the late 80s and maybe just barely into the 90s, the Atari ST was a wonderful thing. And I think for a brief moment in time, maybe 1988, 89 and 90, it was the best computer to buy. You got a lot for your money, and the competition was either underpowered or more expensive without compelling games. And when that wonderful window ended, I started looking at the PC, and in Easter 1993, I switched to PC, and I was happy to do so, but it doesn't change the wonderful memories I have of the games on my Atari ST. So, Jason, I'm quite interested to hear what you knew about the Atari ST from back in the day in America. You're a big C64 guy.
Right.
So you must have heard what Jack was getting into after being shown the door from Commodore. And I think the ST feels like a natural upgrade from the C64, which was fundamentally the same idea. How powerful can we make something in an affordable package?
Yeah, I think that in part the timeline doesn't work out for that part of the argument for me. Like going back to the history, it's easy to see that progression. For me, getting like the most people got their Commodore 64s after Jack was gone. He was gone from Commodore in January of '84, so most Commodore 64s were sold after his tenure, and mine included. I did definitely know about the ST, in the realm of, could this ever happen? Will I ever get a new computer? It took 6.5 years before I moved off the 64. We're talking about late 1991 at that point. But yeah, in that kind of mid late 80s, among those big four platforms, of the 16-bit era, like for a while, the ST did look like the best one to me. I remember that definitely. It had the kind of the coolest vibe. The local computer store ran its cash register, its point of sale on an ST, so it looked legit in that sense. But most of my peers, locally, either had Commodore 64s or they already had DOS machines, and that was sort of where the natural progression went. So I don't know that I actually had a friend that I could go visit and see an ST doing fun things. I could see it in action at the local computer store, but not so much get my hands on it and go, ooh, yeah, maybe I could have this. But from specs, from what people would talk about, from what I would see in computer stores, yeah, the ST was definitely, it looked like a top choice for a good 2-3 years to be, for sure.
I think that's a good point, because when the ST launched, $1,000 with a monitor was out of reach for a kid's Christmas present. You wouldn't buy that for a kid's Christmas present.
Unless the neighborhood was connected with the cartel, as we've heard that yours was.
It was a few years later, and the price went so far down before we got one. They started putting the disk drive into the machine itself as well as a modulator, so you didn't need a monitor. You could plug it into a television. And when I got it for Christmas, I think it was more like £300 rather than the US dollar to sterling exchange rate tended to be 1-to-1 for tech because of VAT. So it dropped in price really fast over the few years after it came out. Didn't have a Mac though, did you then?
No, and I'll use this because it's not the Mac's birthday. I will use this opportunity to say it's a pet hypothesis of mine. Going back to what you were saying about the launch price of the Mac. I struggle to think of a worse value for money in the 16-bit era than the launch Macintosh. At 128K of RAM, it basically could run nothing, like almost nothing that ever shipped for that machine, and it cost $1 billion. Every machine at launch in that time, you look at the price and go like, ooh, am I really going to get much out of this? And we can talk about kind of the race to have to upgrade those things, but the launch original Mac was just brutal.
It's interesting because as Dave was going through the history and comparing the specs on the Mac and the price, I'm still thinking of the fact that I really want to get a MacBook Air. But as soon as you spec it up with the RAM that you actually think you need to make it future-proof, and especially the storage, then you go, well, now it's a really expensive machine again. So they haven't changed.
I know, you can get external storage for it, and then you're thinking, do I want this thing that I regret having this lump coming out the side? Yeah. I will say, though, compared to the Mac that launched in 1984, they are extremely powerful and capable. It's not just the infrastructure you get with the Macs that's better. They seem to be much more powerful machines. Yeah. And the people that I know that have them, that I have respect for, don't regret the purchase.
No, that's right.
They do see it's been a great thing. So I think it's easier to justify it now than it was in 1985.
I will get one, but it just has to have 32 gig of RAM and 1 terabyte of hard drive space.
And so Chris, the closest you've come to owning an ST is the one that's on the screen behind you for those watching the video?
Oh, that's right. Thanks to my mate Shane, who I quickly messaged him and said, Shane, have you got an ST? And if so, send me a photo now so that I could put it on the screen behind me. So there we go. Thanks, Shane. You came through.
I bought a very well equipped. I have to dig it out at some point and kind of tell Dave the specs on it and get his evaluation. But back in the kind of mid late 90s, when people were just blowing out old systems for no money, I bought a nicely equipped, I want to say a 1040. I think I got both monitors. There was an external hard drive for it, and I've played around a little bit, kind of in the. I mean, it's over 25 years ago that I bought it now, but I would still call it kind of the latter day era. But it has been a while since it's been out and running. So
yeah, there's lots of good games on it. Happy birthday to the Atari ST. The ST, of course, just like everything else, faded away in the 90s in the face of the mighty IBM PC, but it doesn't matter. Celebrate the ST for what it was for those few years when it was at its peak. And if you want to know more about the ST, there's a couple of great YouTube channels that fly under the radar that are well worth your time. Gears of Games, where he will play ST games of any sort, as well as Spectrum as well, but ST games of any sort, and give you his opinion on it, kind of more of a first take on it. And Joy of Sticks, who will go in more detail about them for games he already knows about. So there's a little bit of both choice there, but they're both great YouTube channels to go and learn more about the ST. I've linked both of them in the show notes.
We are sponsored this week by Pixel Addict. That's at addict.media because we don't want to get any nasty grams on the screen again. Pixel Addict issue 29 is still here. Or no, is it 29 that's on the way? 29 is on the way, but we're going to talk about 28 because that's what we have information about. No, we're going to talk about 29 because that's what we have information about, but it's not out yet. We're going to tell you about both. We're going to listen. Pixel Addict exists. It's a publication. They have other publications, and they'll sell you binders and things like that. But I'm going to tell you what's in issue 29, which will definitely be available at some point. There's going to be a look at and an interview about the film Terabytes, The Evolution of Horror Gaming. Steve Cooper is going to look back at his first PC and how Undelete saved his bacon. There's going to be an evaluation of the advantages of PC emulation. Roy Templeman takes a break for his Treasure series. Oh, I have to read this again to talk about his game development for the Mattel Aquarius. Davis tricked me into talking about the Aquarius twice in the span of 2 weeks. And the main feature is all about Richard C. Hewison, whose career has involved names such as Telecomsoft, Microsoft, and Firebird. It's going to be a great read when it comes out.
Previously sponsored by Pixel Addict.
Well, people complained that the last one was too well put together. So this one, we kind of freewheeled this one. Let's talk about emulators. I will take almost any opportunity to talk about emulators because I love them. I think they're great. I love software emulators. I love old school, what we used to call hardware emulators, which were really just like a system board for a second computer, and you'd throw it on a card and dump it onto the bus of the home computer. I like FPGA implementations just fine. I certainly do not insist upon them. In a sense, I owe my entire writing career to emulators, or at least my enthusiasm and unrelenting enthusiasm for emulators, because when I was getting started, nobody in the print magazines I was reading was paying any particular attention to what I considered a really exciting area of development. So I kicked down the door at the first online magazine I could find by just submitting emulation stories to them in the hopes that they would be published, and lo and behold, they were. So I did not need much convincing to look into some of our more popular stories on the subreddit this week, which revolve around emulation. The top story was submitted by Pajako6502. It's an Android Authority piece by Nick Fernandez covering the latest release of Dolphin version 2506. Dolphin is a long-running emulator for the Nintendo GameCube and the Nintendo Wii. They're designed for modern hardware and with extremely good compatibility with the official GameCube and Wii libraries. Now, extremely good, quote unquote, wasn't quite comprehensive until Dolphin version 2506, which now brings support for the offbeat Wii title, The Daring Game for Girls, to the emulator. And this had been a long-standing thorn for the Dolphin community, and it seems that a lot of the frustration stemmed from the fact that so much of Dolphin's functionality had improved since its initial release in March 2000, or since the initial 2009 release of the Daring Game for Girls, that everybody felt like this game should work. Why doesn't it work? So they were digging, and it finally turned out to be that there was a bug in the game's code itself, and the audio playback code, which on the real hardware they could get away with, but the quirks of Dolphin's internal audio engine just kind of exacerbated it enough that the game wouldn't run. So the fix was not to change Dolphin, but to patch the Wii binary to be better behaved.
Is the Daring Game for Girls any good?
Well, I haven't played it personally. The article from Nick Fernandez does talk about it and basically says, there's stuff to it. I think the Dolphin release also is like, you may want to take a look. It's interesting. I guess it had a reputation for being shovelware, kind of a cash grab, if you will. I don't like the term, but that was sort of the opinion people had of it. But now that they can play it in the comfort of their contemporary devices, I think it's getting its critical reevaluation. But yeah, by patching the game itself, voila, The daring game for girls goes from being rated as a 1-star broken title on the Dolphin wiki to a 5-star perfectly playable game. Other improvements in revision 2506 include better support for graphical filters and support for the rarely used, and I had never heard of it, WeSpeak voice control module. Dolphin had actually supported the real Nintendo WeSpeak hardware for a while, but it now supports any generic microphone you may have hooked up to your machine instead of requiring the real Nintendo hardware. And if you want to keep up to date on Dolphin's development, we encourage you to track their progress at dolphin-mu.org.
www.
If you insist. If you could put the HTTP and the colon and the slash and the slash. Probably want to put an HTTPS on it. Can we take a moment, guys, to congratulate and applaud Nintendo for being brilliant at recycling their hardware and making the GameCube into the Wii, since it's basically just the GameCube with motion sensors?
Yeah. We don't often say nice things about Nintendo on here. I mean, they do make fantastic, fun games, but we're often talking about them for being litigious and a bit too grabby with their IP rights. So yeah, let's say nothing nice about them. Well done for trotting out the Wii, which is the GameCube, in a new guise,
and getting grannies to play bowling.
Yeah, I mean, but it really is. They captured a moment that, and I don't want to turn this into a Sega versus Nintendo story, but I mean, Sega spun their wheels over and over trying to come up with quirky interfaces for things, and maracas games, and blah blah blah, and eventually they sat down at Nintendo and said, "What if we just put a wand in your hand and help grandmas play bowling?" and lo and behold, like, they sold 1 billion Wiis. So
smashed 1 million tellies.
That too, yeah. But you got it. You turn on, tells you to put that strap around your wrist. Tells you. That's the Dolphin for you. You ride that Dolphin off into the sunset. But if you're waiting for FPGA hardware news, if you're one of thems, Rich Neptune submitted a Kickstarter update from the ZX Spectrum Next team, which talks about 2 alternative FPGA cores for that machine. There's the Sinclair QL Next core, which is already available and is about to get an update. So it's similar in concept to the Spectrum Next in that this QL Next core, it's not just the original Sinclair QL machine. It's got advanced capabilities beyond that original QL spec, rated up to 44 megahertz of performance. If that does not please you, I did find a number of alternative cores out there for everything from dedicated arcade machines to the MSX1, original Nintendo, Amstrad CPC 6128, ColecoVision, etc., etc. Or you can wait a little while for the Commodore 64 core that the Next team says is under development and has, quote, reached maturity recently and was demonstrated at RETCon 2025. So the Spectrum Next team are going a step further, and they're offering to pay license fees to put the core with real Commodore 64 BASIC and kernel ROMs in the hands of their past Kickstarter backers, which does seem nice of them. Guys, do either of you have one of those FPGA-based machines, the Next? Anything like that?
So I've got the SU2 Next. I haven't used it yet. It's still in the box. I've always told myself when I find a compelling reason to do it, I'll get it out. But I don't have a space to put it on here. So I don't want to unbox it just to do that. I want it to be a bit special. So maybe Stu Cambridge and Tony Warrener's new game, Urbex Warriors, maybe that'll be what gets it for me. I was going to say that the Spectrum Next is having an SU3. In case anyone isn't aware, they are preparing to launch the Kickstarter. The Kickstarter hasn't launched for it, but there will be an SU3 for the Next. They say it'll be the final one, but they said that number 2 will be the final one. So there is an opportunity if you don't have a Next to get in it. I want to talk. I think when you ask me more later on, I'll talk more about it, about why I think the Next is getting more appealing.
Chris, you have one of them fancy FPGA machines?
I have no fancy FPGA machines, but I have been lucky enough to see both the Mega 65 and the Next in the flesh at events here and at a mate's house as well. That was where I saw the Mega 65. And they're just stunning products. Discussed it many times of how being new to things like Kickstarter, I was kind of not sure about. It was the Next that had me tempted. If that product had been available to pick up off the shelf in a shop, I'd have had one 100%. I just wasn't sure about the whole Kickstarter thing, and that's why I missed out on the initial one. And then when the round 2 came around, I was kind of happy with the actual machines I have, but I say it again, they're just stunning products. And for me, they're as legit as, the original Spectrums, the original Commodores. They feel like a natural evolution of what we had before. So, yeah.
So this idea of having, the kind of the purpose-built machine, so the Spectrum Next, it has a Spectrum throwback keyboard. The Mega 65 tries to re-implement the Commodore 65 prototype keyboard, et cetera, et cetera. So the idea of, when we do software emulation, we're usually on our regular desktop or laptop. We've got kind of the generic, 101 key or laptop equivalent. So everything's kind of a foreign land there. What do you think about the idea of experiencing a Commodore 64 with a Sinclair keyboard or vice versa? Does that feel brain breaking to you guys? Because it does to me.
The only way around that is to have a Commodore 64 and a Spectrum and a Coco and a BBC and a CPC and an Amiga and an Atari ST. You'd have to have all of them to experience the tactile feel of using a real machine. And I think it has to come down to compromises. Which one do you want the most?
Sure.
I think it's the point of contact that I feel makes emulation more immersive.
Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, if you're a big joystick player, you can kind of get away with it, whether it's FPGA or whether it's software. If the joystick feels like something from the period, then does the keyboard matter? Not really, maybe, because if you're just launching the game, it's what you're actually playing the game with. But yeah, so for me, it would feel weird to be running the Mega 65 as a Spectrum or the Next as a Commodore, for me personally.
And I think if you look at what the console fans want from FPGA, the two things they ask for. The first is to be able to plug in an original controller, so they can use the original controller. That makes sense. They're used to using that. But the other thing that loads of people cry out for, I want to put real cartridges in. And if you think about it, that's the two tactile things that you do with these old machines. You put the cartridge in, it clunks in, hopefully a satisfying clunk after blowing on it, which is the ritual. And then you put the real controller in, use the real controller and the real cart, and you're 90% of the way there. And it doesn't matter so much if it's a Pi inside. Maybe if it's a Pi inside, it's not quite as responsive, or sometimes now the Pis are more responsive because they've got look ahead technology in them. But it matters. I think Chris is right. It matters far more what you touch and what you feel and what you see, rather than what's inside the case.
Yeah, and I think the what you touch, I've got a standard generic beige HP keyboard that I've had for over 20 years. So, when I emulate something with that, I'm just kind of in like the lingua franca mode. I don't think about it very much, but I don't know. I may have to explore this kind of, cross pollination, where you're on the legit old keyboard, but emulating a completely different platform. Where I get lost a little bit in this, the Spectrum Next Kickstarter description is they say, quote, if the platform is embraced by Commodore 64 fans, the core could evolve with their help to become a completely new machine compatible with the cool Mega 65 and more, expanding their community further. I get lost a little bit here because the Mega 65 started life as an FPGA implementation of the abandoned Commodore 65 prototype machine, which, by the way, I have one of in my bank vault. But it has evolved into its own beast.
Really?
And yeah, I really do.
As in the original prototype?
Yeah, I really do.
What?
I mean, there were like 1,000 of them, but I really do have one. Yeah. It is, apart from my home, it is the most valuable thing that I own.
Far out.
Wow.
If that Mega 65 core ends up fitting inside the Spectrum Next hardware, then great, let them all be fruitful and multiply. I'm just struggling to see a connection here other than, hey, this thing is sort of like the Spectrum Next. There's a third FPGA story that comes also from Pajaco 6502. It's an Ars Technica piece by Ben Jedwards, and it picks up on Peter Ostapowicz's Atarino, a new Atari 8-bit FPGA core. It turns out Ostapowicz's project has been floating around for a little while now, but details are only slowly emerging, and often they're only in Polish. But what we do have from Edwards' reporting and Ostapowicz's posts on the AtariAge forum are images of an extremely tiny board that holds a Lattice UP5K FPGA to run the core. The board is like 2 by 1.5 centimeters in size. And in that, he's also managed to pack HDMI, stereo sound out, connectors that expose the Atari's SIO bus. There's a connector for keyboard, additional IO lines, some micro SD card on board to provide storage. So after what we're told is a decade in development, is this project ready for prime time yet? Well, Ostapowicz has talked about the project for a while. His YouTube channel has just a few preview videos on it. None are running complex tasks at 100%. So I think we'll still see where this guy goes.
I remember the kind of snobbery that I felt when the Mister project first got lots of attention around 5 or 6 years ago. All of a sudden, everyone was talking about Mister and how it's not really emulation. Including myself, I wanted to find a new word for it, perhaps simulation. And I no longer feel that it should be described as different. I think that sometimes people with real hardware want to put Mister in with software emulation to say it's not as good as my real hardware. And people with the Mister want to say it's just as good as real hardware. It's not as good as software emulation. Ugh. And then software emulation will find ways to say why their way is better. But it does feel, using FPGA does feel a little bit nicer than using just a Pi or an emulator. There's definitely a point to what Mister and the Next and the Mega 65 and all the rest is doing. It's more complicated and accurate than the emulators. They're trying to emulate the whole thing from start to finish rather than just the output. But they just feel better to use. I like that the Next and the Mega 65 are proposed as kind of the next step up from the Spectrum and the Commodore 64. I don't think that's the selling point for me. I think the selling point for me is they are the nicest one to own. They have a modern power supply, HDMI out, flash storage, etc. built in. They're reliable. They're not going to have dodgy MOS RAM in there, whatever it is. They're not going to empty RAM. Yeah, it's failed already. They're not going to have that in it. They're nice ones to own. They're shiny. They don't have finger gravy in it from 30 years ago. They're the nicest ones to own, and they feel authentic. They do feel authentic. But what we're getting from them now is a great thing. We're going to get them being more versatile than what they were sold to be originally. The NICs can be, by the sounds of it, any 8 or maybe even any 16-bit micro if the core is written for it. So why couldn't it do arcade machines as well? I don't know what the limits are for it. My Mister personally is for 16 bits and down, and mostly it's for arcade machines. It can do much more than that, but I don't ever ask it to. I don't think I will. I don't have the interest there. So perhaps my SU2 Spectrum NICs could be the same. It could be effectively a Mister, but in a shell that makes it a Spectrum. So if you're buying a Mega 65, you're buying a Spectrum NICs, or there may be similar projects coming out as well. If you end up getting an FPGA machine that does other things as well, that's a lot more for your money. As I mentioned earlier, you can't have, well, I do, but not everyone can have a big row of these machines in a line to play whichever one they want to use whichever one they want to, and feel the real machine. So if you're going to have one, then you could have an FPGA Mister and a generic keyboard, and that's fine. Or you could have it as, you could have your Amiga, and it could feel and look like an Amiga and feel like an Amiga, but you could switch it into Spectrum mode, and it could also do dual purpose there. I've said in the past, though, what I wanted was for people to make FPGA breakout boards. So you would get a Mister, and you would get a breakout board that fits inside an existing case. So you could have an Amiga 500 Plus, for example, that has battery juiced itself to death. The Varta has eroded the traces and killed the chips, and you've taken the customs out and they've given them to someone else to help get their Amiga back on the go. So you've got an empty case and a keyboard, put the FPGA in, and a breakout board that connects to the back ports to allow you to get from the FPGA to USB ports at the back and power ports and all the rest of it. So I thought that would happen, and it's not happened. So my prediction about that 5 years ago is wrong. But maybe it'll still happen. But maybe we can still get these things, because people are making new cases. So you can buy a new Amiga case. You can buy a new Commodore 64 case. So you could buy a new case, the breakout board, and the Mister, and you could have your ideal retro machine there that has a split personality and can switch to being a spectrum if you wanted to.
Well, I don't want to let this fly by before I say, I love software emulation. I love the quirks of it. I love feeling like I'm getting away with something on a machine that shouldn't be able to run this stuff. So I love this stuff. But
I miss that. That's what we had in the 90s. See, when I got my first emulator, it felt... And playing Gauntlet 2 on a PC.
Yeah. I don't mind the quirks. Just the very first thing I fired up, or one of the very first, running Mac emulator on a machine we're not naming this week, and I had to scroll the screen up and down. Didn't matter. Loved it. Just a final note from that Ars Technica article. It talks about how the Atarino system does not need to periodically halt the CPU in order to let the Antic custom chip access memory in the 8-bit architecture. It is not clear to me, an Atari 8-bit novice, whether that would mean that timing of existing Atari 8-bit titles might need to be adjusted, or if this is kind of a Mega 65 type concept where it would strictly be for new style implementation of a computer using these old concepts, kind of a super Atari 8-bit with capabilities that are not feasible in the original models. Time will tell.
I'd like to welcome in 2 new patrons. So welcome to Magnus and welcome to Sodium Light Baby. Thank you for joining our Twirler roster. If someone wants to join up, what would they do, Jason?
They would go to patreon.com/thisweekinretro and then sign up and give us their money.
Yeah.
Just go. Finish the actual sign up of the enlistment. If you're already in, sign in with your Patreon account and say, yes, I do want to support these 4 pixelmen.
If you want to do something else instead, then go to your podcast platform of choice, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whatever, and leave us a review. Tell other people, because that's the only way the podcast will spread, is through recommendations appearing on lists that the podcast app suggests to people. So please give us a review. I mentioned Unbound and Boundless a few weeks ago, talking about this crowdfunding book platform where you could go and get people to crowdfund your book and they would handle it all for you and help you along the way. Unbound went into administration and something weird happened at the time that I commented on. I said, I wonder if this is phoenixing. Phoenixing is not legal in the UK, although it's questionable whether it's enforced. The idea with phoenixing is you continue on a new company with the advantages of the old company having shed all the debt and not paid your debtors. So more has become apparent on that. Nerd Cubed has a YouTube video on his experiences being ripped off by them as an author. And at the end of it, he does reveal that he has lawyered up, as have many other people. I think it's 268 is a number, I'm not sure. 268 people who have lost out as a result of this have lawyered up. Now, the reason why, I think, is what happened when Unbound went under. Normally what happens when a company goes under is the assets of the company are sold on for as much money as what they can get. Now, that could be the intellectual property rights. It could be the furniture. It could be the properties that are owned. Whatever it is, it's sold on for as much as possible, and that's then used to pay off the creditors as much as possible. With Unbound, all of the book's assets were sold off as one single package for £50,000, according to Nerdcubed. For £50,000, which is not much at all. It's a pittance to Boundless. And Boundless are owned by the same people. So what it looks to me has happened here, and I don't want to say this is definitely what's happened, it just looks like to me has happened, is the owners of Unbound have sold themselves, as a new company, these rights at a ridiculously low price. And the authors seemingly have nothing, no recourse. At the time, Boundless said they would honour everything, and now they are saying it's a goodwill gesture which they're no longer obliged to make, and they aren't honouring it. So people aren't getting what they were due to get. There's loads of other problems identified by Nerdcubed in this, so the whole thing is rather unpleasant. And I would suggest that HMRC should be looking into this for phoenixing, because it looks to me that there is a possibility that Unbound's creditors have been ripped off, because what they should have been paid for these rights, packaged up as one lump sum for £50,000, would appear to me to be worth more than that. Sorry, the cat has just attacked me with his little claws. So it appeared to me worth more than that. So if that's the case, then I hope that if they do lawyer up, they do get what they're due, and Boundless get what they're due as well.
Possibly allegedly.
Yeah, I mean, I can only go on what I see from there. So it's not for me to say that this is definitely the case, but it looks a lot like it. On to news and briefs. And Trevor Keverson has an interesting BBC article on pensioner gamers. Gaming is now 50 years old. Actually, it's older than that, but I guess mainstream computer gaming at home is now 50 years old, if you think about that. And there are people now who are pensioners who play games. So the gaming industry is having to adapt to them, it says. It's not news to me at all. There's plenty of people in the hobby already who have retired.
I think what's going to have to adapt is the old people's homes, because traditionally they play dominoes. By the time I'm in an old people's home, they better have a PlayStation.
Well, why can't we have finally all the time in the world to play the games we want in an old people's home with 16 of us crowded round a set of CRTs while we frag each other?
Why not? Why not? That's perfect. It might induce a heart attack, but whatever. I've got to go sometime.
After they replaced the screens destroyed by Wii remotes being thrown in bowling.
Yeah.
Starcade 2084 cross-posts a picture to the subreddit from Old School Cool, and it's the wearable computing project from MIT from the 1990s.
Sadly, Bill Atkinson, creator of Mac Paint and HyperCard, passed away. Thanks G7 VFY for letting us know.
Squelch 411 is a genius. He's got his Amstrad PCW 9256 on the web, browsing the This Week in Retro subreddit. Amazing. Well done.
Boulder Dash, that puzzle game starring Rockford, has a nice long article and an interview in the Spielhistory blog. Thanks to Rich2600 for letting us know.
Namco is backing a Taisei Denkai Co project. I think I pronounced that. It's not, really isn't. It's a project to produce an AI-powered light gun for modern TVs, pre-installed with Time Crisis, called the Game, GAIME. It's not launched yet, but yeah, apparently that's coming. I love Time Crisis, favorite light gun game of all time, so it's one to watch.
There is loads and loads more in the subreddit. Have a browse when you're having a crafty log.
Hey, you know what we hardly ever discuss? That's right, it's digital preservation and copyright. Projacko6502 to the rescue with a link to a piece on GameDeveloper.com by senior editor Bryant Francis about GOG, or Good Old Games. It's worth a read as it details how games preservation is at the heart of GOG's business model. The first time I came across GOG was because my boys wanted to download Doom, I think it was, onto their laptops, ready for a LAN party at a friend's house.
Take after the dad then.
Yes, they do. Yeah. I think it was Doom. According to my boys, I always remember these things wrong. But anyway, it was something like that. What I clearly remember was that at the time, I was the virus protection for the house, right? As in, if they wanted to install anything, they had to check it by me first. And that's when they showed me GOG. I didn't show it to them. Doesn't look legit, I probably said. And I went off and did some research and blow me down. It is legit. GOG, if you're not aware, and I'm sure you are, but just in case, it does what it says on the tin. They sell good old games, mostly at reasonable prices, and they're fully licensed and they are DRM free. While you can use their launcher, you don't need to. You can download standalone installers and just install the game offline just like that. And of course, you can keep and back up the installer as well for later use. So if GOG ever goes out of business, you don't lose a single thing. The article by Bryant basically unpacks the challenges of this model and also the work that GOG puts in to create the wrappers for the games in an effort to continue compatibility on modern systems. He also details how some of that compatibility has been assumed, as people don't bother complaining if things don't work. They're probably like me. They've got a mass library they've downloaded and they never play them. But anyway, but basically, it's this preservation ethos that's at the heart of what GOG do. It sounds like I'm shilling for them. Honestly, I'm not. This is just part of the story and my own experience.
I'll come in with some counterpoints later on. I'll balance it out.
Okay.
I'll add some salt to your sugar.
Yeah, fair enough. Occasionally, games get delisted, sometimes because the IP holder decides to make their own storefront and sell their products on. That has happened. And I guess
you don't lose access, though. You don't lose access to the games you bought if it gets delisted, though. So if you buy it and they pull it from the shop, you still keep it.
Yeah, that's right.
And I guess while we're talking about the library, I'll just chime in here. Like, I remember when I first discovered it, maybe around the time that you did, Chris. And at the time, it seemed like it was a few of their own in-house titles, The Witcher and stuff like that. And then the dregs of the Interplay catalog that had changed hands a few times by that point, and not a whole lot else. And there's a substantial amount of stuff there. Not only newly released titles, but they've gone back and wrapped up a lot from older publishers and things like that maybe weren't sold even in English language markets. So yeah, it's been quite a growth,
including gold box games.
Yep. And
what's the other one to the left of that? Treasures of the Savage Frontier. I think that's what it is. Or is it Gateway to the Savage Frontier?
That one. Yeah, that's Gateway. And then off to the side is Dr. Dumont's Wild Party, which is an obscure Michael Berlin title.
Don't think I've seen that in GOG.
I don't think it's up there.
Cool. The key point from the story that we're talking about is that they've done some new work on the DirectX wrappers, which they hope will make the games playable and compatible forever, basically. Well, unless, obviously Windows and Microsoft drop support for DirectX, if that ever happened. But the idea is to make these games last forever. And it heavily notes that it is GOG, not the game developers or the publishers, that are putting in the effort to make this work. I personally think GOG have got it right. Legal, well-priced, curated distribution of games that are DRM-free and will hopefully just work, in inverted commas, into the future. My boys think I'm anti-digital only, but that's not entirely true. I'm anti-buying something that will probably not work in 30 years' time, when I'm possibly dead. But it's about ownership for me. And so a digital installer that will always be installable, for me, that's fine. On that note, guys, what I'd like to shine a spotlight on today is this. Do you use any modern gaming storefronts or modern consoles with their built-in gaming storefronts? And do you have any faith that somehow you'll be able to play the back catalogue in the future, 20, 30 years, whatever, in our old people's homes maybe, especially if, for example, the company behind them goes belly up or drops support? What do you think are the possible solutions? Jason?
Well, can I first call dibs on hoping that I'll be alive in 30 years? Let me jump in on that one.
I hope you'll be alive in 30 years as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Dave. You as well. Chris was sort of ambivalent on the point, but at least two of us are on record now. We'd like to be around. Thank you. Overall, I would say I have a very optimistic attitude towards it. And I think we're already seeing some evolutions of that model. Now, there are some very hilarious videos out there of the new Xbox Classic streaming service, which is showing off like massive compression artifacting from people playing all text Zork 1 that is being streamed with heavy video compression. So maybe we're not all thinking this through and what it would mean to stream some of these games. But
how can you not compress text?
They're just looking at probably like we can just maximize the compression settings here. There's nothing really going on, and then you can't read it. I mean, hopefully that's just a growing pain story. But the fact that in addition to the running these binaries locally, like we do with GOG, we're looking at streaming now. I mean, I think that the move, as it has been with GOG, will continue to be, kind of the containerization of everything. Even if and when DirectX, is sunset. We will build these containers just like they already do, running a lot of those old games in DOSBox. That will put it in a container that fakes its way through being a Windows machine of whatever vintage, whatever hardware, whatever DirectX, iteration, and we'll still have that on our 256-bit implanted ARM chips or whatever, the ARMs in our ARMs. And what those VMs lack in elegance, they make up for in, hey, at least I got to play this game.
The appeal of GOG for me, certainly originally, was the older games. I guess it still is. I have Amazon Prime, so I periodically go on and click through and collect all the games I'll never play on GOG and add them to my library. For some reason, Amazon Prime seemed to give me a lot of games on GOG. I can't say that GOG are perfect. Their package games aren't exactly what they could be at Optimum. Sometimes you can go in and change the settings and get better sound options in DOS games, but they're close enough. And importantly, it's the final patched version, sometimes with fixes that you get. Whereas if I pick it up off my shelf, I may not have that. And I don't want to necessarily spend 3/4 of an hour going through rabbit holes and the Wayback Machine trying to find patches for old games. So I like that they're doing that. I do wonder about the buy it forever thing, and I wonder if we're kidding ourselves on. I know that with things like Steam, we're not buying it forever technically because they could take it from us, but I don't know if there's actually any real practical difference. I use Steam. I'll happily buy a game on Steam. I'll happily buy a game on GOG. If I had the choice, I would buy it on GOG over Steam. But I'm happy to use either. I'm less happy to use other things like the Epic Store or the Origin Store from EA. Oh, hang on. We don't have the Origin Store from EA because they've closed it and they've replaced it with another one. And that's my worry. You go to buy a game, it's only on one platform, so you buy it there. 10 years later, something makes you think about that game, suddenly enters in your head. And if your head's like mine, your head will say, Dave, you must go play this game. And I can't because I can't find access to it. I look through the emails. Maybe I'll find a trail of breadcrumbs that leads me to wherever they moved it to. Maybe I'll be able to log on and claim the game in there somewhere. Maybe I'll get a login for it, or maybe not. Maybe they sent out a message on the launcher only that said you've got a month to download a DRM-free version of it, and then you're out of luck. And maybe I didn't do that and I've lost it. I think it's safe to say that in Jason's time frame of 30 years, most of these stores and the apps that they use will be gone. They won't be there. But will we have the downloads from GOG? I mean, GOG could disappear. They are the same people that did Cyberpunk, the latest Cyberpunk game, and it did really badly on launch to the point it was pulled and refunded, I think, on the PlayStation because it was so badly released. I think it's great now. I think they fixed it. But it's not impossible that GOG goes under. And maybe they go under and someone buys the GOG storefront and realizes it's not worth the while and shuts it down, and people lose access to everything. Now, does everyone right now have everything that they've bought on GOG downloaded and saved in an archive that has protected against bit rot with redundancy? I don't think they do. But piracy will save us.
That's on us though, not the storefront. I mean, at least my point with GOG is they are allowing us to, whereas Steam, for example, as a counterpoint, are not. It's log into Steam. That's how you access the game. So yeah.
Steam's one I think probably will still be there, although who knows. But yeah, Steam's the strongest example there. There's other ones that are good examples of why you wouldn't want to. For me, the GOG thing. If they produce these packages of the best way to play a game, and lots of people have this package, and in 30 years' time you want to play, I don't know, I'm trying not to say Ultima, Descent, let's say Descent, you want to play Descent, and you've lost your copy of it, someone else will have it saved, and piracy will save the day, I'm sure. But for me, the thing isn't it's DRM free or anything, it's just because of the access to the old games packaged up, ready to play, without feeling that I'm doing anything that's coming up and bashing against anti-consumer stuff. I don't feel that GOG do anything that's anti-consumer. I don't have a bad taste in my mouth. Yeah, I'm not sure that buying a game in GOG for most people means that you guarantee you'll always have access to that, because there's extra steps you need to do, which I don't know are reasonable, but I'm very happy with them.
I think we can all agree that preservation matters. I can't think of another storefront that's doing things this way, not just for computer games, but what about downloadable, keep forever digital movies or TV shows, for example? Why is that not a thing? I'm glad.
Do you know it's because people, I think, don't necessarily want it.
Maybe.
I don't think people will pay extra for it.
Yeah, I mean,
I think if you had these platforms, they said rent this movie for $3.99 or own it forever for $7.99, you'd find a huge skewing towards the $3.99.
Yeah. I've purchased a couple of movies on Google or YouTube or however you do it. I don't count those as things that I own. Does that make sense? Even though I can watch them anytime I want, I don't own them. They're a digital entity. It's a fugazi. It doesn't exist.
It is different.
Yeah. I'm glad God exists. God? Sure, glad God exists.
Well, that's philosophical.
GOG and God exists.
That's the question.
And the GOG are legit.
Does God exist?
Yeah, there we go. That's the question of the week. I'm glad GOG exists and that they're legit and that they view preservation as this important. I really should bother to play some of the games that I've paid for and downloaded, Dave. Falcon 3 Gold Collection, I'm looking at you.
There's a link been posted since we started this recording from Beatfixer, and it says, "Hi, I'm not sure if there's anything of interest, but I've just got an email from GOG announcing they have a free PC game mod section. So they're doing even more there."
Oh, fantastic.
On to the question of the week. And last week we asked you, what's your best obsolete computer skill? We were talking about PDAs and using the graffiti system to input data. And we asked, what's your best obsolete computer skill? I've taken out of contest mode. The top answer is from Paul, aka Hermsky. Hi, Paul. The art of being able to get the perfect picture by carefully twiggling, what a great word twiggling is, the TV tuner knob while getting your dad to sand in a certain spot.
Yeah.
And from Turlin Dark, the engineering skills to construct using just an HB pencil and headless wooden match tape to it, the ideal-sized rapid manual magnetic data storage medium reset tool, or in layman's terms, something you can rewind a tape cassette incredibly fast by spinning it on a pencil perfectly jammed in its wheels.
Nice. Shishakali, great name. He says, he or she says, DOS batched file scripting. I got to the point where I would create batch files that would create other batch files to iterate through, then clean up the extra files ready for the next time. Sounds very complicated.
That sounds as if it's not far away from the plot of a sci-fi film where little nanobots take over the world.
Yeah, it sounds like it's... Did you create a virus? Is that what you did? That then hides its own tracks? It sounds something like that. He says, I'd like to say I migrated to PowerShell, but it's too damn inconsistent. I'm still using VBScript as the only thing that works on everything from Windows XP to Windows 11. There we go.
Colony activist and Richard Shears have the same idea. Richard talks about the art of getting all of the ISA cars to work together, writing all the IRQs, DMA, and base memory addresses down to find a magic combination that worked, while juggling the TSRs and memory configurations, mouse drivers, etc., to a finely honed boot menu in order to have enough base conventional memory to launch games. And Colony Activist talks about freeing up base memory to load Falcon 3.0.
Oh, there we go.
The question of the week for this week, I think, should be, what are your Atari ST memories? Go to the URL, Chris.
reddit.com/r/this week in retro. Because I'm right there right
Fantastic.
now.
And question of the week, submit your answer. What are your Atari ST memories? It's been 40 years of Atari. And guess what's coming next month? 40 years of something else.
What could that be?
Something else.
We'll find out.
I know.
Dave, did you want to qualify? You would like fond memories of the Atari ST, or do you just want people to unload?
Fond.
I know
Fond
what's
memory,
going to happen. I'm not going to fight against the tide.
Fond. Whether you owned one or not, fond memories of the Atari. Even I've got some.
I will not.
Right.
Even
well,
I've
the
got
power
not
is in your
be
hands,
continued.
dear listeners. You control the fate of Dave's feelings.
I can ask them to be nice. There we go. Be nice, people. Be nice.
Shall we wave
Very
now?
Thank you for listening to others. I've been Dave. He's been Jason. And he's definitely been Chris.
I am Chris.
And they're all waving.
Thanks all.
I'm raving. Bye.
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 This Week in Retro was written and presented by Chris from 005 AGIMA, Jason from the Retro Adventurers, and Dave. It was edited by me, Duncan Styles. The podcast version of the show is available through your favourite podcast app, including Apple Podcast and Spotify. And the video version is available on the This Week in Retro YouTube channel.
Join our community subreddit at r/This Week in Retro to suggest and vote on the stories we cover on the show. If you watch This Week in Retro on YouTube, please give us a like and subscribe to help us reach new viewers.
If you enjoy our show and would like to support it, then please check out the link to our Patreon page in the show notes or description. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time for more up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.